My name is Michelle Doane. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. I am the Director of Authorizer Services with SchoolWorks. I have been with SchoolWorks for several years, have worked both with school operators and founders and authorizers, and I'm really excited to join you today to talk a little bit about charter school boards. And I will let Marci introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Marci Cornell-Feist, and I have worked with charter school boards exclusively for almost 30 years, which is hard to believe. Many boards, and most of them from the founding and watching them grow and scale. So have a lot of thoughts on today's topic and next week's webinar. So thanks. I appreciate SchoolWorks having me here.
And it looks like, based on the poll, we've got a good mix of people. We have founders, leaders, board members, association members, authorizers. So we're really glad to have all of you here. We hope that today will be helpful for all of those viewpoints in seeing really what makes a really strong founding board and how to get there. And to kick things off, I will let Marci begin.
Okay, thanks everybody. So before I dive in and talking about the roles and responsibilities, which is our first topic, I just want to thank all of you for both being here and for starting charter schools. The movement has grown and expanded, and I think sometimes we wonder if there's going to be more new schools, and then you all appear. So we're happy to help you with starting that journey wherever you are. So the first thing is to think about, we thought we'd talk about is the roles and responsibilities of a founding board. But before I dive into that, I wanted to just quickly define when I say founding board, and I think when we're talking about it in this webinar, what exactly we mean, because that term means something different to different people. But when we talk about the founding board, we're really talking about the group of volunteers that come together to form a founding board to support that charter application. And the charter, when the charter application is approved, the charter is actually awarded to the board, not to the passionate lead founder, not to the school leader, not to the board chair, but to that collective group. And that's the group that we're talking about. The founding board's ultimately accountable to the authorizer from the day they're authorized on. And they're accountable ultimately for the school. Even though there'll be an executive director or a school leader running the school, it's really the board that holds the charter. And then after you get chartered, there's a phase where the founding board evolves and becomes the real governing board. And we'll talk about that in our next webinar. But there's a couple different common scenarios when people found charter schools. The most common one, and people can put it in the chat if they have questions or other examples for us, but mostly there's some passionate lead founder, often an educator, but not always, who has a vision for a new school, sees a need, and starts bringing people together, both people who might work in the school and then people who might serve on the founding board. And but there's other scenarios. We've seen lots of times there might be a strong education management organization that looks for a founding board, or a charter school management organization that's growing and replicating, and they might put a board together first and then find a leader. And occasionally I've worked with over 500 charter schools at this point, and there's definitely a handful that have been really motivated business leaders, or maybe a nonprofit, a strong nonprofit that wants a charter, and they form the founding board. But usually it's the passionate lead founder. And so we'll mostly talk about from that perspective, but feel free, we're happy to talk about all different perspectives. So as far as the roles and responsibilities, I think the main thing is really for the founding board in this founding stage is really understanding the charter. The charters can be these giant documents. They get smaller and smaller over time, but they're still pretty meaty necessarily, because you're writing a business plan basically for a multi-million-dollar business, and it's complicated. It's a complicated business. And so the most important thing you need to do is really understand that. I think oftentimes boards just kind of nod about a lot of it, and I think you really need to understand it all. And when I think about a charter application, it is big and meaty, but there's really some core charter promises. So what is it that you're promising to deliver? And those are the things that founding board your role and responsibility is to pull out those charter promises and make sure you understand what they are and how you might measure them. But I think the part that is often the hardest for founding boards is understanding the vision for academic success, because that's the whole point of a charter school, is to produce great results for kids. And sometimes we can get lost in the alphabet soup of state tests and various things. And so a founding board really needs to work with the lead founder and understand, what does academic excellence look like at our school? How are we going to measure? How do we know that we're on track to get there? And so I think having a clear plan to conduct oversight of academics is a really important responsibility. And then financial oversight. Unfortunately, the main reason why most charter schools fail is financial mismanagement. And yes, every year there's a couple examples of people stealing money and doing bad things, but mostly it's not that. It's that scaling up this multi-million-dollar business with a group of busy volunteers on a board is complicated. So you really want to understand how you're going to do financial oversight. And then the other really important responsibility is the support and evaluation of your school leader or executive director, whatever title you're going to call them. And as I said in the intro, very often that lead founder, that dynamic founder, is the one who recruited you. And then all of a sudden you have to kind of flip the table around and you become that person's boss. And it can be a little funky and a little challenging. So the sooner you start understanding that your role is really to support that person, but also to evaluate them and help them improve as a leader and give them good feedback. There's a bunch of common mistakes that we see over and over again. So it's great that you're here for the webinar. And the more you understand the mistakes that other people have had, the more you can avoid them as you go through. So I think the most common thing that I've seen, whether it's articulated or not, is quite a bit of rubber stamping. You have this lead founder, maybe they've run schools before, and the board just says they must be brilliant, they are brilliant, and they just nod and go along and not really asking good probing questions. Another common thing is not building time to educate the board. It's okay that you don't understand a lot of the charter. And in this founding phase, when you're writing the charter application and going through the submission to your authorizer, it's a great time to learn. You have a long runway before the doors are going to open, and you should set up structured ways to kind of break apart the application and really go deep. Somebody on the board is probably a subject matter expert on the finance part, on transportation, on facilities. And the more you build in time to actually learn, the better off that you're going to be. Another really common pitfall is being too close personal friends or colleagues of the lead founder. Because as I said, ultimately, the lead founder reports to the board, and the board has the ability to hire and fire that person. And if you're too close, it's hard to see truly how things are going. And it can also be really hard to give that feedback. The other thing that's common is having people on the founding board that want to work in the school. And in many situations, you can have people on a founding board and then they can resign and then work in the school. In some places, they can do both. I don't really recommend that. So it's really better to start things off cleanly. And if you think you're going to want to work in the school or apply for a position in the school, it's better to support the launch, this founding and the charter creation in different ways. And many schools create design teams that are really going deep on the academic, that aren't the governing board that will hold the charter. And many of those people will go on to work in the schools. So just kind of thinking about how to separate that out is important. I think another thing at this stage in the charter movement that is, I don't know if it's a pitfall and or a recommendation, but there's so many great charter schools out there. And there are so many different kinds and models. So work with your school leader and understand, who is it that we're aspiring to be? What handful of schools have really inspired us and that will show us what success looks like, and go visit them, go talk to them. And I find I've worked with a lot of more mature boards that have mentored founding boards, and you learn all this stuff through the School of Hard Knocks, and you have no one to share it with. So find a board that you think in your city or town that's doing a charter school board that's doing a great job, and go watch their meetings and talk to them about what did they learn, and just kind of educate yourself by, if you kind of have a vision of excellence, it's easier to get there. The other thing is that when you get chartered, you have to comply with your state's open meeting law. And there's all kinds of rules for that. It means that the public gets to see how their taxpayer dollars is being spent. So the public can come to your meetings, You have to post the meetings. You have to let people see your minutes, all kinds of things. And you don't have to go overboard in the founding phase, but you should definitely learn that. And as you're starting to go through it, even though you're not subject to that yet, it's good to run your meetings kind of professionally and get in the habit of doing the things you would need to do once you get chartered so that there isn't a steep learning curve. Those are most of my things for now. I guess the only other thing I mentioned in the beginning that some of you may be working with either charter management organizations or education management organizations. And I think a very common mistake in this founding phase is just not getting clear about the roles and responsibilities within that. What is the EMO going to do versus the founding board? And when you get chartered, does it look any different? And that's the same with the CMO. So I think understanding those things. Anything I missed, Michelle, or
No, I think that was great. And just a reminder, I know she just gave you a lot of information. So if you have any questions, please feel free to enter it into the Q&A chat. And we will try to address some of those questions towards the end of the session. But as Marci talked about, she mentioned some of the roles and responsibilities of that founding board. And what I'm going to now talk about is really who the right people are. So that's the next piece of it, is you want to make sure you have the roles and responsibilities and you're really clear on them. And then you want to make sure you have the right people and fit. So that's looking at skills and commitment and their fit to the school and to the board. So if you have been kind of in the charter school space, you've probably heard of a lot of the common skill sets that are often used to talk about boards. So things like education, finance, operations, legal expertise, sometimes human resources, fundraising, real estate, those sorts of things. Sometimes authorizers are really specific and prescriptive in their applications on what skill sets they actually want to see. Sometimes they're not. But in general, these are the overall areas that we really want to look for in a board, both if you're a school operator trying to build a board and if you're an authorizer kind of reviewing the capacity of the board. It's also just ideal, if possible, to have at least one member who have had prior governance experience, particularly charter school or nonprofit, just because it is a little bit of a different world in charter school governance. And so having that experience may also help with the board's understanding of really their responsibilities as well. The other piece of this, though, is while we've mentioned these skill sets, you also want to think about building a cohesive board. We talk a lot about having boards that are diverse. This goes beyond kind of race, gender, ethnicity, those sorts of pieces. This goes also into things of you want a balance of perspectives, of life experiences that people have had, of their stakeholder groups. So whether it's community members or parents or how they are kind of affiliated with the community or with the school. You want to make sure that you have these different perspectives, which will really help that you, as you kind of create the school, you have the people that will be able to both push you and support you to make sure that you're building the right school and also the right board. So some things to consider when you are building your board is one, really mission and model alignment. So does the prospective board member really demonstrate kind of a passionate belief in the mission and the model? Do they really understand what the mission and the model is? Do they know what it would take to implement it? And then are they committed to that as well? You also want them to make sure they have a really clear sense. As Marci said, the board will hold the charter if the application is approved. And so you want all board members to really understand that they will be ultimately overseeing the academic, operational, and financial success of the school. And they should also be holding the school leader accountable. So that's one, do they understand that? And two, will they be able to do that? And those are things that you also want to make sure you're looking for. Another thing to consider is the understanding of commitment and time. So for those of you who have been involved in charter schools, either as a founder, as a staff member, as an authorizer overseeing it, or anything like that, you know that being on a founding board is really hands-on, and it takes a lot of time and active participation, because this is the point where you're building the board, you're building the school, you're building the application, you're building the community engagement. You're really doing all of those pieces. And when you're first getting started, it falls a lot on the founder and then the founding board or the founding team. So you really have to find people who are willing to put in that time and make that commitment as well. Another thing to consider is also depending on where you're located. What is the kind of political or charter context and landscape that you are in? Are they comfortable if the local charter landscape might be a little bit more divisive, or it might be a little bit more political? Are they okay with that? Are they okay kind of still being committed to the school as a board member, being that support piece and really advocating for the school? So one other piece is that Marci had mentioned too, is that you want to make sure they can effectively oversee everything. So whether that's the school leader and then also the CMO or EMO, if there is one for that, you want to make sure you have the right people in place who would be able to do that. So how do you find all of these things in a board member? You may talk to a lot of people as you're forming a board, and not all of them may become board members. They might not be the right person. Really, in the best scenario, you have almost like a matchmaking or an interview process. So you ask them questions, you meet with them, to kind of get a sense of, do they know what the mission and model are? What is their connection to it? Ask them why they want to be a board member. Do they understand kind of what the context and the local landscape is? Can they navigate through that? You also want to outline expectations for commitment and time and really be upfront of saying, these are the things that would be expected of board members, what we expect you to participate in, kind of the responsibilities, those sorts of things, because you want it to be a mutual agreement so that both you on the front end, if you are the founder, and then the prospective board member both really understand very clearly what the roles and responsibilities are. And if they mutually agree on that and think that that would be a good fit, then that is fine. There's the other scenario of you may meet people and think that they would be a really good board member, and maybe it turns out that they will be more in an advisory capacity. Instead of being a full-time board member, they will help with one kind of specific piece of it, whether it's helping you think about instruction or helping you think about different operational pieces rather than a board member. It may be that the person will still advocate for the school, does not have the time to be on the board, but may also connect you to other people as well. So you can also use people as potential networking opportunities. So there's really a lot of different ways in which you are finding these board members, but you do really want to make sure that you're finding the right people. And then from the authorizer perspective, as you're looking at who applicants are proposing as their board members, you want to also get a sense of that. So going back to the skill set piece, do they have the different pieces, the different areas that you think are necessary in order to be able to successfully oversee the school? Do they have the capacity? So this is a really good place to probe for in the capacity interview for authorizers is getting a sense of who the board members are. Can they speak to what the school is? Can they talk to the model? Can they talk to governance? Do they really have a strong understanding of the school? And does it give you confidence that the board would be able to oversee both the school and the school leader and then the CMO, EMO, if possible? One thing that we have seen, that I have seen both from kind of the operator side and the authorizer side, and I know Marci has also kind of experienced as well in all of her work, is what we'll see sometimes is you have boards and they have too many members with the same expertise. A lot of times it's education or academics. It's very kind of academic heavy, and they don't have the other pieces, the other kind of places of expertise. And then also then what happens if you have too many with that one expertise is that it just gets a little bit jumbled. It can get a little bit more challenging to figure out kind of the different pieces of the model and what it's going to look like and those sorts of things. So that's one thing to consider is, yes, obviously you want to make sure that you have people with experience in each of those areas, but you also want to make sure it doesn't get too top heavy or too heavy loaded with one expertise over another. Another thing that we have found too is that sometimes the board doesn't necessarily reflect the community, or it's not really clear if these are the right people that are in place. So something that we sometimes we'll see, especially when it's a founder who's pulling together a board, is they might be pulling together people who have these different areas of expertise, but it's a friend. It's someone that they know. It's someone that someone else knows who they know, right? So it's some sort of connection, and they're not necessarily taking the time to really make sure it's the right person. And so what happens, or what can happen in those instances, is that there's not that same level of commitment that you want from the board. They're kind of doing it. They sometimes will think that they're doing it either as a favor, or it's not necessarily a full commitment. And you want to make sure that you have those people in place that will be able to hold the school accountable and also the school leader accountable. Another thing that we have found as well, in thinking about boards and founding boards in particular, is when you have kind of the mismatch of areas of expertise, there can sometimes be, you're sometimes wondering if the board actually has the capacity to do these things. And so that's what happens for authorizers when you find in the capacity interview, is thinking about are they actually able to speak to these pieces? Can they talk about the evaluation process? Do they know how they're monitoring data? Those sorts of things. And you want to make sure that they're able to speak to those things. School founders, you want to make sure your board members can speak to those things as you're bringing them on board. And really just making sure you have the right people in place. Anything else to add, Marci?
No, I mean, each of these topics we could do a whole webinar on. So yeah, I think you covered the big ones. Yeah. So I guess shifting on and then to last piece, and then we'll do some Q&A. It's just thinking about you found this board, and the most important thing they're going to do is oversight. So how do you really set yourself up in these early days to get in position to do effective oversight over the long term? I think the first thing is making sure, to what Michelle was saying, is that you have the right people on the bus. And inevitably during the founding phase, you will have some rock stars and they will be great, and you'll want them to continue on after you have the charter. And you'll have some people that just aren't great. Maybe they're not good at group process after all. Maybe you didn't realize they have a personal agenda, and maybe they just don't have enough time. As Michelle said, this founding phases can be pretty intense. So I would think about having processes to just evaluate that and know that if they're not a good fit, you shouldn't just limp along. You should think about growing your team and maybe jettisoning that. And one way you can kind of protect yourself is in the beginning, when you ask people to come on as a founding board member, tell them that once we're chartered, there's going to be a reevaluation phase. And we don't want everybody to leave right away, but we're hoping you're going to go the distance, but there'll be a way for both sides to evaluate, just so you give yourself an out if someone isn't a fit. I think doing a lot of deeper learning on how other people are successfully doing the oversight, particularly on the academics, if that's something that's new to you. And again, going to watch some other charter schools, and you could even ask authorizers for advice about boards they think are doing a really great job and why, and go visit them, go watch those boards in action and see what they're doing. One important thing that's maybe obvious, but maybe isn't in the founding phase, is that governance really is leadership. And so hopefully you'll have someone who will step forward and be the board chair. But a good way to set yourself up for success is thinking about how you're going to distribute leadership. Once you get chartered, you'll probably want committees. You'll need work being done in between board meetings. And so starting to build your team and thinking about who else can lead and lead in different areas than just relying and burning out your board chair. So thinking about that leadership. One thing is to really, there's kind of no way around it. In the founding phase, things are very reactive, but the more that you can be strategic rather than reactive. So if you know your charter is due in 6 months, have a calendar that each month, what do we really need to get done in order to submit that charter? I feel like a lot of founding boards just kind of show up at meetings and respond to whatever the lead founder is putting in front of them. But if you can kind of be strategic and give people things to read so they can come to the meetings more informed or able to ask good questions, and that's really good practice for a board in general. You really want the board to be able to be strategic and not so reactive. Another thing that I think is really interesting that I do work when I work with founding boards, when you go through the charter application, is to ask the lead founder, what things in here are really radical? Like, are there things like, is this something that every charter school in our city is doing? Is this something new, especially if you're not an educator? And on the one hand, you should have comfort if there's certain things in the model that are standard and they can point to 6 really awesome examples. Great, you can probably learn from those people and replicate it. But that's okay. So, charter schools do have innovation. If it's something really crazy, like that's new, that isn't being done in your city, then ask your lead founder where they got the idea, who's their inspiration, and to see if you can learn from that. I think that's something an authorizer will probe if they're standard practices. That doesn't necessarily mean that you should do everything that's a standard practice, but you kind of want to understand what's new and different in the application and how you're going to defend that. And that will stand you well as you move forward. The last couple of things I'd say is to control the communication. Working with boards, it's always more work than everybody thinks. And there can be emails and emails and emails and emails and documents and all kinds of confusion and these long email chains. And so you really just want to think about what your group norms are. These are busy volunteers that are helping out. And yes, there's a huge amount to do, but think about how you're going to share information. Are you going to have those long email chains to solve things? Or are you going to have more frequent meetings and tell people to wait and just kind of develop some good communication norms? And this will really serve you in good stead as you're going through this long process. The other thing is to start talking right away about the delineation of the lines of authority. So what's the board ultimately responsible for? What's the school leader responsible for? How about parents? Where do they fit in? Where do teachers fit in? Where does the authorizer fit in? And start talking about these things. I find that a good practice in this founding phase to prepare you for overall oversight, when someone brings up an issue, before you try and answer the question, stop and say, what of this belongs to the board? Like, are we ultimately making this decision? Or is this really a management thing that the lead founder is asking our opinion, but she's going to make the decision? And just start talking like that. So when you have big meaty things, you'll kind of have built the muscles to talk through situations like that. And I guess the last thing I'd say before we probably dive into the Q&A is have a lot of urgency around the business parts of the school. So how are you going to do the financial record keeping? Are you going to need to fundraise? If you are, nobody on the board likes to or has any experience fundraising. What are you going to do about it? How understanding your enrollment. In some ways, church school is a complex multi-million-dollar business. On the other hand, it's a pretty straightforward business model. I've been a small business owner most of my career, and if someone told me all the money I would have for the whole year in advance and I could plan, that would be really cool. So understanding the enrollment numbers and how, what the make or break numbers are, that's a big part of your business model. Just understanding charter school financials, understanding if you're going to have professional help to help you with the bookkeeping. Because remember in the beginning, I said the number one reason why charters fail is financial mismanagement. And that's always traces back up to the board. Ultimately, this is on the board's shoulders. And I think a lot of that is because people didn't get the professional help that they needed right away to start getting the accounting and all that going smoothly. So those are some tips I have.
And one thing I wanted to add, Marci, that you reminded me of is, so this whole time we've really been talking about making sure you have the right people in place. And we've talked about some of the different places where the board will show up. And we have mentioned the capacity interview. And just to go back to that capacity interview and really the importance of it as well is, from the founder side, this is your opportunity to really demonstrate what you know, that what your founding team knows to answer questions and things like that. And what we will sometimes find when working with authorizers and going through that process is when you either have kind of groups where only the founder is talking, or maybe the founder and one board member is talking, and you really don't see that flow through the whole group. And that's really what the authorizer should be looking for, and usually is looking for. They want to make sure that everyone on that board or in that founding group can speak to the school. It doesn't mean that you need to know all the ins and outs. So for example, if your expertise is not education, you don't necessarily need to know all the kind of inner workings of all the curriculum and instruction, but you should know what the key features are. So you know what the key features of the model are, you have a broader understanding of what goes into the pieces, and then the founder or whoever, if there's an education expert on the board, they can kind of fill in those details. But overall, the board should still have an understanding of all of those pieces. So the academics, the operations, and the finance. So they can generally speak to all of those pieces when the experts can then fill in the little pieces.
That's good.
All right, so looks like we've got some questions here. So one question, so can the school founder also be part of the board? No. Well, so if the school founder intends to move into being the executive director or school leader or whatever it is, the position title is of the school, then they should not be a voting member of the board. Sometimes we'll see, Marci, correct me if I'm wrong, sometimes they'll be ex officio because they'll be present at the board meetings, but they are not involved in actual votes.
Yeah, I agree. So in your bylaws, you would spell out that the person who runs the organization, school found, whether you call it the school leader or the principal or executive director, CEO, you would usually put them in. What I would recommend is that they would be ex officio member of the board. So by virtue of their position, as long as you're in that role, you get to have a seat on the board. And then to what Michelle said, ex officio can be voting or non-voting, and I prefer non-voting. Probably most authorizers do too. It's just a conflict of interest to vote. And I always say, if there's something really important that you're going to vote on, a big deal, some big change that needs to happen in the budget, or whether you're going to grow and add a new school, or all kinds of things, hire some board expansion kind of thing. Before you ever get there should be healthy discussion, and any school leader worth their salt will influence that discussion, right? You should be involved. It doesn't mean just because you don't have a vote, you don't have a say. You absolutely have a say, but you should probably be ex officio non-voting. Yeah.
So another question. So what steps would you take to build a board if the founding board members all left within a short time after starting year one? I'm finding it very difficult to find candidates who want to devote the time, who are qualified, and who aren't already associated with the school in some way. Marci, you want to take that?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think the first step is some of the things that we talked about, which isn't going to help the person who asked the question. But really, as Michelle was saying, really vet and interview and find a solid founding board. And I think a lot of people know that people they're recruiting don't really have time, but they just think, oh, they're going to get so involved in the school and they'll make the time. And I find people just have less and less time as time goes by. So take them at face value. So try and really recruit a founding board that is prepared to go the distance. But this does happen as the person is asking, where the founding board just kind of falls apart. And so I don't know the context, it depends. I know some people are in rural places where it can be harder. But if you're in a just kind of a mid-sized community, even rural community, I think we're looking for instantly like, who do I have that can serve on the board? And a really good technique is to think about who's a referral source. Who knows people? Because I think we all get in our own little circle and we're only asking people we know, or like you said, only people who are the spouses of someone who already works in the school. So think about who are the good connectors. They could be CEO of a small to mid-sized company in your town that's a good employer, that's like a just good community member and go talk to them about what you're looking for and who do they know. Community college presidents I have found can be really, really great resources. There's all kind of affinity groups that I've had good luck with. There's a national organization of Hispanic MBAs and have regional chapters, and they tend to be really active and have young people skill set that you would need, often in finance. And I'm going to speak, do a brown bag lunch or something. So think about getting your story out there and thinking about referral sources rather than just kind of cut to the chase with, can I add board? That's my short question. Yeah, short answer.
Let's see. As an authorizer, can you describe an effective way of approaching governing boards who appear from the outside to be making some of these common mistakes? So I would say this is a tough one because obviously as an authorizer, you're holding your schools accountable, but you are also affording them that autonomy. So I think the question would be, what do the conversations look like that you're having with the boards? Kind of what are the mistakes you think they're making? And kind of question that and think about what conversation you might have, because really as an authorizer, you are more focused on the outcomes and not necessarily the inputs. And so the thing is, if there are outcomes and there's now performance issues, or if there's deficiencies, or if there's concerns or interventions, that may be a point where you can have that conversation with them, and you may be able to kind of point out where you think the issues may lie. But ultimately, it's kind of up to the school how they're going to approach that, especially in terms of their board. The authorizer is not in any way involved with that piece, so it's a little bit of a kind of a challenge, and that's where it's really important to develop those relationships between authorizers and schools so that you can kind of have these conversations.
One suggestion I have that I think a lot of boards do find helpful is many times they don't really have this vision of excellence. Remember, I said we're always busy reacting, not being strategic. So it's just like sprinting from one board meeting to another, or one kind of crisis to another in the early days where lots of things are new and hard to get right. And so one thing that might be helpful is I have found are developing kind of quizzes, like little self-help quizzes, like here's like what the excellence looks like, and are you doing these things? And just give people a chance to hold the mirror up, because it's true that authorizers really are focused on the outcome, but by the time you get there, it's a little too late sometimes to fix some of the problems, and oftentimes you're not getting there because the process is flawed. So maybe some open-ended questions, that like reflection questions that they could look at and discuss as a group and kind of rate themselves, how they're doing, because it might help them pinpoint some places to get better.
Are there times when the board may work with senior staff on the admin side to work on gnarly issues in a workshop type setting, or do you think this blurs lines? So I think that would depend on what you are asking them to do. I think it's fine to bring in board members if it's their area of expertise and let's say you need help with something around instruction and they come in and kind of help. If they start kind of coming in and doing school level or school related tasks, I think that's when it could get a little bit blurred.
Yeah, agreed. I think that's where you're better off finding peers at other schools that are solving that, especially if it's an instructional problem, because I think the line can get blurred really, really quickly.
And then I keep hearing about a probation period for the board within the first 5 years. Can you explain, and what are the constraints during this period? I don't know that I've heard of a probation period. Marci, have you heard?
No.
I wonder if that may be school specific. I don't know. Or if it's some sort of a trial period. I don't know that I've heard of anything that's a formal kind of probationary period for boards. And then let's see. So Similarly, so this question also is a little bit similar to one we had. What suggestions would you have for board members related to maintaining momentum as far as being hands-on and in the loop of the school's progress? Some schools are more involved than others, and this is unveiled during renewal and interim visits. So similar to one of those previous questions, it'll start coming down to the authorizer school relationship. So have you gotten to that place where you can have these kinds of discussion with the school? Obviously, you can't influence what they are doing with their board, but if you have concerns, you can always relay them. And then what you're doing is then kind of keeping an eye on what the outcomes are and whether or not these things are being addressed. And then there's one last question. I know this call is about governance. My question is about money. In New Hampshire, we get so much less funding per student than the sending districts, which causes a huge challenge. Is there any effort to change this, or does the money follow the student? I don't know how it is in New Hampshire, so I am not sure about that. Marci, do you know?
No, I don't. Yeah.
Yep. Sorry about that. Oh, and then there's one more question that just came in. So most authorizers evaluate board effectiveness and quality as part of the school's performance framework. I'm wondering if you have seen any successful metrics authorizers have used to evaluate school boards. Since they vary widely and all over, this seems difficult to perform when all boards are so different. It leads to Michelle's perspective on measuring outcomes, not processes, but then what are we evaluating them on if we really want them to be good? So that's a good question, because yes, we have seen authorizers measure them differently. Sometimes it gets simple. It's more of a compliance check, right? So are they having the board meetings? Are they are they aligned to what the meetings that they say they're going to have? Those sorts of things. I've seen some authorizers, I feel like, starting to get into the effectiveness quality piece, but once again, there's that trickiness of what does it really mean to be that effective board? So I think that can vary on what the authorizers' expectations are and what they want to see from the board. And I think the effectiveness and quality then also comes through in the overall framework with how the schools and the school leaders' performance is. But Marci, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you answered it well. The only other thing I'd add is that governance should get better over time, and it should look different over time. So if you're a year one school, just passing a budget, just passing the budget is probably understanding it and building the budget. That's great. But when you're a year 5 school or year 10 school, you should have 10-year budget project. You should be creating the future much more than reacting to the here and now. And you could take that over all the different academic oversight, financial oversight. And there are definitely ways to see if the board's practice is getting better over time, meaning they're not just doing level 1 work, they're doing higher level work that's helping focus on the long-term sustainability and viability of the school. So that's the only thing I'd add.
Yeah. Well, we are at time. We really appreciate you joining us today and asking questions, really great questions. But thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you next week.